The most dangerous thing you can do is apologize first. Not because you were wrong, but because you were afraid to be seen as unlikable, uncooperative. Too much. That first apology, but the one that tumbles out too fast, is not strength, it's submission. And it comes with a quiet, invisible message. Please, still accept me. Carl Jung once said, what you do not make conscious will control you. And most men have no idea that their compulsive need to apologize is not empathy, it's programming. You were trained from childhood to be the peacemaker, the smoother of tension, the boy who never made waves. And for a while it worked. You were praised for being agreeable, liked for being flexible, rewarded for swallowing discomfort to keep others comfortable. But Jung knew the psyche keeps score, and the parts of you that bent too often, they don't forget, they don't forgive, they just wait, because every premature apology cuts a little deeper into the spine of who you are. You think you're saving the connection, but what you're really doing is betraying your inner truth in the name of approval. You apologize before you're even accused. You soften your tone before they react. You dilute your needs before you state them, and soon you don't even know what your truth sounds like anymore. You're just reacting, apologizing, appeasing, performing, and the people around you, they've learned exactly what to expect. They know how to frame the story so you'll absorb the blame. They know how to withdraw just long enough to make you chase the closeness again. They know how to punish your confidence with silence, because silence is your trigger. Jung would call this a fracture in the self, a split between the man you are on the surface and the resentment boiling beneath. And here's the worst part. You think you're keeping the peace, but you're just avoiding the war inside. The part of you that wants to speak, to hold the line, to say, no, this is not okay, gets buried under layer after layer of politeness. You start believing that your silence is, but because you've shown them you'll always trade power for permission. You say, sorry, and they hear, you can push me further. You say sorry, and they think, he needs me to feel okay about himself. They don't see your apology as honor. They see it as strategy failure. And this is where it starts to spiral. You stop trusting your instincts. You second-guess your boundaries. You hesitate to speak, not because you're unsure of your truth, but because you're bracing for their reaction. You pre-filter your words. You dilute your tone. You apologize for your emotions. And little by little, you vanish, because a man who apologizes too soon, too often, too automatically is not a man. He's a mirror reflecting everyone else's comfort at the expense of his own reality. Carl Jung would call this the suppression of the shadow, the refusal to integrate one's darkness, one's resistance, one's capacity to say no. And the more you suppress it, the more you apologize, not from strength, but from self-betrayal, until eventually you're not apologizing for what you did. You're apologizing for who you are, your tone, your presence, your truth, because somewhere along the line, someone convinced you that love and belonging are earned through softness. But Jung knew the truth. A man who cannot say no will never discover his true yes. And Machiavelli knew the consequence. Those who do not command themselves will be commanded by others. So let this sink in. That first apology, the one you gave just to keep them close, was the moment you gave away your leverage. They didn't need to control you. You made it easy. You handed them the keys with the word, sorry. And if that feels familiar, don't run from it. Use it. Because now you see it for what it really was. Not a moral failure, a strategic one. And the next time you feel the urge to explain, to apologize, to smooth, ask yourself, am I speaking truth or am I begging to be tolerated? Because from that awareness, a new man begins to rise. The guilt game. How apologies become emotional leverage. There's a reason you always say sorry first, and it has nothing to do with morality. It's about control, not theirs, yours, being taken from you, slowly. Carl Jung said, "The guilt a man carries is often not his own. It's inherited, projected, trained. And you? You've been trained since boyhood to flinch. Trained to sense emotional shifts like a hunted animal senses rustling grass. Trained to apologize before the storm even comes, just to prove you're not the cause of it. You didn't learn apology as healing, you learned it as survival, because somewhere deep in your nervous system you associated other people's discomfort with danger. A sigh meant distance. A cold silence meant rejection. A pause in their tone meant abandonment. So you said, "I'm sorry," not to fix the situation, but to reel them back in. That's not accountability. That's self-abandonment disguised as emotional intelligence. But guilt is a master illusionist. It doesn't show up in flames, it shows up in whispers. Maybe I was too much. Maybe I shouldn't have said it that way. Maybe if I just explain myself better, they'll understand. That voice in your head, it isn't you. It's the ghost of the people who made you think your worth was conditional. Conditional on being soft, on being quiet, on being easy to digest. And now you don't need an abuser, you've become your own. Carl Jung would call this the puppet master within, the part of you that's internalized the expectations of others so deeply that even in their absence, you still serve them. You say sorry when you feel tension. You say sorry when someone else is cold. You say sorry for the possibility that you might be the problem. That's not maturity, that's programming. Because here's the dark truth Machiavelli knew. The man who apologizes first is the man who fears power more than he holds it. Apologies, when weaponized by guilt, are not bridges, they are contracts, unspoken agreements that say, your peace is more important than my dignity. Your comfort is worth more than my clarity. Just don't leave me. And the moment they learn that you crave forgiveness more than they crave truth, the game begins. They withdraw, you panic, they act hurt, you confess. And now your own guilt becomes the evidence they use against you. This is how manipulators win without lifting a finger. They don't need rage. Neurosis is the suffering of a soul that has not discovered its meaning. And if your guilt doesn't lead to growth, it's not soul-searching, it's self-erasure. Because a man who apologizes for the impact of his truth will eventually stop speaking it. And one day, you'll wake up exhausted, not from life, but from all the emotional labor you've been doing on everyone else's behalf. You'll wonder why no one checks in on you, why no one offers you peace, why you're always the one closing the gap. It's because they've learned the same lesson you've refused to face. You'll say sorry just to keep them around. And anyone who fears being alone more than being disrespected will always be easy to control. So if this stings, good. That's the shadow coming up. That's the part of you, Jung said, must be met, not ignored, because guilt is not always a signal of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's a signal that you're outgrowing the version of yourself they depended on, the soft one, the predictable one, the apologetic one. And if you're ready to break that pattern, start here. Next time you feel that guilt creeping in, don't apologize, pause. Ask yourself, am I correcting a wrong, or am I surrendering to a dynamic that's never served me? Because if it's the second, then the most powerful apology you can offer is silence. And not to them, to yourself. He called shift. When you disappear instead of react, you used to react. You used to text back with a wall of words. You used to explain, clarify, plead, because deep down you didn't want to lose them. Not the person, but the peace their presence symbolized. You weren't arguing to win. You were arguing to be seen, to be understood, to stay safe. Carl Jung would call this the wounded child in the adult psyche, the part that still thinks love must be earned through appeasement. And every time someone pulled away, you moved closer. Every time they got cold, you got softer. Every time they crossed a line, you redrew it to keep them inside. You thought that was love. But it wasn't. It was a performance, one you learned young, one you perfected with pain, but something changed, not all at once, quietly, the same way fog rolls in and rewrites the shape of a landscape. One day, you didn't react, you didn't chase, you didn't send the follow-up message just to prove you weren't the villain. You just went still, not from anger, from revelation. You saw the pattern, the trap, the loop, and instead of running the same script, you did something radical. You withdrew, no tantrum, no explosion, just distance. And in that distance, you did what Jung called withdrawing projection. You stopped needing them to fix what you felt. You stopped asking them to validate your side. You stopped needing them to come back so you could feel whole. And suddenly, the power reversed. They didn't know what to do because you weren't predictable anymore. Machiavelli said, "The wise man strikes only once, and never with noise." And your silence? That was the strike, because disappearing doesn't mean disappearing from the world. It means disappearing from their control. You no longer orbit their moods. You no longer soften to earn clarity. You no longer need to be understood to know your truth. You walk away, and the echo that follows isn't your voice. It's theirs, replaying what they said, what they ignored, what they took for granted. And the version of you that used to react, he doesn't live here anymore. The power of being unreadable. They used to read you like a book. Your face gave it away. Your tone gave it away. Your silence gave it away. They knew when you were hurting, when you were anxious, when you were desperate to repair things that they broke. And they used that knowledge not to protect you, but to predict you. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And you? You called it just who I am. You thought being transparent was a virtue. You believed your vulnerability was the bridge, but you didn't build a bridge. You built a map to your wounds, a map to your needs, a map to every soft spot they could push when they needed control. And the more they read you, the more they stopped respecting you, not because you weren't strong, but because you were predictable. Machiavelli said, "Men judge more by the eye than by the hand." Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. And so you change. You become unreadable, not to hide, but to heal. You stop explaining your pauses. You stop apologizing for your shifts in energy. You stop broadcasting your emotional weather like it's public data. You become a mystery, and in that mystery, they feel something they haven't felt around you in a long time: caution. They hesitate before speaking. They watch your expression more carefully. They start to wonder what you're thinking beyond, because you've stopped making it easy to know. And that's when it happens: respect. Because in a world obsessed with access, what they can't read, they can't use. What they can't predict, they can't manipulate. What they can't define, they're forced to feel. Jung would say, only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. And you become the paradox, soft but firm, kind but unshakable, present but unreadable. And in that unreadability, you don't lose connection, you gain control, because the most powerful man in the room isn't the loudest or the smartest or the most agreeable. It's the one no one can figure out why your availability is killing their respect. You were always available. You answered before the second ring. You replied at midnight. You showed up even when they didn't ask you to, even when they didn't deserve it, because somewhere deep down, you believed that being reliable would make you irreplaceable. But it didn't. It made you forgettable. Carl Jung said, the psyche longs for what it fears to lose. But if they never feared losing you, they never truly valued you. And Machiavelli warned, familiarity breeds contempt. You thought consistency meant connection, but what it really did was kill curiosity. because when someone is always there, they stop being seen. Their presence becomes background noise, expected, not appreciated. And the more you gave, the more they assumed. You gave time, they took it. You gave grace, they stretched it. You gave loyalty, they stopped earning it. And one day, you wake up and realize the people you thought you were impressing aren't even paying attention, not because they're cruel, but because you trained them to believe you'd always be there. And what's always there stops feeling sacred. Carl Jung called this the inflation of the ego, where others, fed by your endless supply of presence, begin to feel entitled to you without contribution. And it's your fault because you made availability your value, not your clarity, not your standards, not your mystery, just your presence. But that ends now. You begin to retract, not out of spite, but out of respect for yourself. You stop answering right away. You stop bending your schedule to fit theirs. You stop chasing after people who only remember you when they're bored. Because when you reduce your availability, you increase your energy, your clarity, your power. Machiavelli would say, a prince must make himself desired by being absent. And when you start doing that, something strange happens. They notice, not all at once, but slowly, in the silence, in the space where you used to rush in. Suddenly, your presence feels rare again, valuable, memorable, and that's what respect requires. Not constant contact, but earned access. Emotional control is the final advantage. They use to know how to get to you. A word, a glance, a delay in response. And suddenly, your chest tightened, your voice rose, your fingers scrambled to reply, explain, defend. Because they knew your weakness, you reacted. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And the unconscious part of you was ruled by emotion, not passion, instinct, fear, old wounds, unhealed stories. And every time someone touched the right nerve, you gave them the remote control, not of your phone, of your mind. Your tone shifted, your day was hijacked, your confidence dissolved. And the worst part? You believed it was your fault. You thought, if I was stronger, this wouldn't get to me. If I was wiser, I wouldn't care so much. If I was a better man, I'd be unaffected. But here's the truth. Jung understood. You are not what happens to you. You are what you choose to become because of it. And emotional control is not the absence of feeling. It's the presence of choice. It's the space between what they say and how you respond. It's the moment you pause, not out of fear, but out of power. Because when you control your emotions, you control the entire dynamic. Machiavelli put it coldly, he who masters his passions masters those who provoke them. The loudest man loses, the most reactive man bleeds first. The man who shows all his cards becomes a toy, not a threat. But when you go still, when your tone stays flat, when your gaze doesn't flinch, when your decisions come from clarity, not compulsion, you become dangerous because unpredictability is power. They no longer know how to move you, how to shake you, how to extract the same reaction that gave them superiority. Now they're unsure. They hesitate. They overthink because you've stopped under-feeling. And in that reversal, they begin to sense it. You've stopped being available for games you didn't design. Jung would call this the emergence of the integrated self. The man no longer split between truth and survival. You don't need to scream. You don't need to ghost. You don't even need to argue. You just hold the line, calm, centered, untouchable, because emotional control isn't a performance. It's a position. And now you sit on higher ground. Your disappearance is the real strike. They thought you'd explode, that you'd fight harder, chase louder, beg for resolution, but you didn't. You didn't shout. You didn't plead. You didn't post a final message wrapped in poetic suffering. You just stopped showing up. No explanation, no goodbye, no closure. Carl Jung said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. but by making the darkness conscious. And the darkness you made conscious was your silence, because silence isn't absence, it's an answer. And in your disappearance, they felt something they never expected, a mirror, not a tantrum, not a guilt trip, just their own actions echoing back at them. Because when you were always there, always reachable, always agreeable, always apologizing, they didn't feel lucky, they felt entitled. You gave without question. You forgave before they asked. You anticipated their needs before they even voiced them. And they didn't see that as GRACE. They saw it as DEFAUL. But now you're not there to absorb the mess, not there to clean up their emotional debris, not there to soften every blow with self-blame. And in that vacuum, your power begins. Machiavelli said, "A prince must know how to disappear without losing his influence." And that's what you did. You left the room, but you took the gravity with you. Now they notice the stillness, the absence of comfort, the silence. Machiavelli said, "Men respond more to fear of loss than to the warmth of continued gain." And now your warmth is gone. You no longer reward disrespect with explanation. You no longer repair what you didn't break. You no longer offer closure to people who treated your truth like a negotiation. You are still. And in that stillness, there's power. Because silence forces reflection. Silence forces imagination. Silence forces discomfort. And those who once dismissed your words now replay them because they'll never hear them again. When they come back, you won't. They always come back. Not because they've changed, but because your absence forced a reflection they never expected to feel. The silence became heavy. Their power didn't land the same. Their tactics didn't bite as deep without your reaction to feed them. So they circle back with vague messages, with friendly check-ins, with rewrites of the past that make them look softer. And you look like the one who gave up too soon. But this time, you're not there. Not out of bitterness, but because you finally understood what Carl Jung meant when he said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And what they did was enough. They blamed you when you were bleeding. They dismissed you when you were vulnerable. They called your boundaries problems. And they only remembered your worth once your silence made them crave it again. But that's not love, that's withdrawal, and you're done being their dopamine, because when someone only reaches out after they feel your absence, they're not returning to value you, they're returning to use you. Machiavelli said, "He who forgives once will be tested twice." And you've already passed the test, not by confronting them, but by choosing to never return to a version of yourself that needed their approval to feel whole. You didn't go quiet because you were defeated. You went quiet because you were finally done bleeding for people who called it communication. There was a time when you gave explanations like gifts. You wrapped your pain in polite words. You softened your anger into jokes. You translated your truth into something they could tolerate. But that man is gone. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And becoming who you truly are requires leaving behind who they trained you to be. The NICE version, the quiet version, the endlessly available, ever-explaining, always apologizing version. You were not born to be tolerated. You were not made to be easy. You were not designed for the comfort of those who fear their own reflection. You are not a convenience. You are a force. Machiavelli said, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." But you don't need either. You don't move to provoke fear. You move in truth. And truth, when held without apology, is feared by those who can't manipulate it. From this point forward, you do not explain, you do not plead, you do not soften yourself to make others feel taller. You walk into rooms and say nothing, and the entire energy shifts. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. You no longer argue for understanding. You no longer audition for approval. You no longer trade your authenticity for temporary affection. They will call you distant. They will call you arrogant. They will call you unrecognizable. Let them, because the man who speaks less moves different. And the world doesn't just hear him, the world adjusts to him. You don't raise your voice. You raise your standard. You don't chase love. You embody it and let the worthy step forward. You don't shrink to be chosen. You expand to be remembered. And when they ask what changed, you smile, because nothing changed except the part of you that finally realized, I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to be free. From this point forward, you are not available for anything less. You are not fragile. You are not cold. You are untouchable. Now you don't reply, not to punish, but to protect, because the version of you that would have answered, that version is gone. He was soft in the wrong places, loyal in the wrong directions, patient with people who mistook his grace for weakness. Now, you're not angry, you're just done. You don't need to chase, you don't need to explain, you don't need to perform, just hold your line. Because when you stop asking for respect and start embodying it, the world around you adjusts. If this hits something real, don't comment to be heard, comment to remember. I don't chase, I replace. And if you're done playing their game, subscribe now, because the next move is yours. And it starts with stillness.